Hello and welcome to Dog Day Chess. In this episode, I'd like to show you a game that I played recently. It was dominated by positional play. It contained a lot of strategic maneuvers and also a lot of instructional elements, I think, which is why I'd like to walk through it here. So I'm playing the white pieces, and I start with e4, which black answers by playing a6. And I take the opportunity to grab a full center with d4, and black answers with h6. And then I play knight to f3. Bishop to e3 was actually the preferred book move here, but knight to f3 was not bad. Black responded with d6, and I played c4, grabbing more space in the center. And then black played e6. I continued by playing knight to c3, getting even more control over the center. And my thinking was that by holding back these two central black pawns, I'm keeping black's bishops blocked in. So from here black brings his knight out to e7, and then I bring my bishop out, clearing the way for castling. I opted to move my bishop here to e2 rather than d3, because on d3 it would interfere with my queen's control over the center, and on e2 it could block a potential knight pin if black should play bishop to g4. So black continued by playing b6, and then I castled. And immediately after that, black played g5, storming my castled king. And I answered that by playing queen to d3. And this was really just a clearing move. I wanted to bring my queenside knight over to the kingside to help defend against the pawn storm, and I wanted to do so by bringing it to d1 and then e3. So I needed to clear d1 in order to do that. Then black pressed on by playing g4, attacking my knight, which I moved over to h4. Now my knight is certainly offside in this position, but it does blockade the pawn storm, and it does eye the f5 square. This knight move was actually a discovered attack on the g-pawn by my bishop, so black pushed his h-pawn to support the g-pawn. So then I shifted my focus to this area of the board. I played d5. And there are really a couple of things that could happen after that move, both of which I think were good for me. One is that we could exchange these pawns. If, for example, black moved his bishop out and we exchanged the pawns on e6, then this would weaken the king's position even more. And if instead of capturing back with the f-pawn, you captured back with the bishop, then that leaves a potential outpost for my knight here on f5. And if we step back and look at the scenarios where we don't exchange the pawns, for example, what actually happened in the game, which is black playing e5, then that also leaves a nice hole for my knight here on f5. So that was the reason why I played d5. I felt that both of those options would be good for me. So now I begin to bring my queen knight over to the king side by playing knight to d1. Then black develops his knight to d7. And before continuing with my knight walk, I played b4. I wanted to keep the black knight off of c5 so that it wouldn't threaten my queen. Black moves his rook over to put more pressure on the g-file, and I bring my knight over to e3. My reason for bringing my knight over to e3 was not only to help defend against the pawn storm, but if after bringing this knight over to f5 it should get captured, I'll have another knight ready to replace it. Black plays his knight to g6, and finally I bring my knight to the outpost. It was 6 moves ago that I started maneuvering my knights, and I finally got them into the position that I wanted. From here they watch over the pawn storm and they control many squares in black's territory. And then black immediately follows that by bringing his knight to a very advanced spot. But the difference here is that I can always kick his knight away by playing g3. His knight's attacking my queen, so I have to move her to safety. I move her to c2, where she protects the e2 bishop from that knight. However, my queen is overworked, as we'll soon see. Black plays knight to f6, attacking my e-pawn. But I ignored the threat and simply moved my king off of the file that the rook was on. This is a mistake, because my queen is overworked. She's doing double duty protecting this bishop and this pawn, and she can't do both jobs effectively. If black captures my e-pawn with his knight, then after my queen captures back, the other knight captures my bishop, and so I'm down a pawn. If we step back a bit to before I move my king, the correct move would have been to move my rook over to protect the bishop. Now, in the game I moved my king, but fortunately for me, my opponent didn't realize that my queen was overworked and didn't capture the pawn. Instead, he moved his bishop out. So then I played f3, attacking one of the storming pawns. If we exchange pawns, then the f-file will become half open and my rook will be on it, which will be a nice position for him. Instead, black answered by pushing his pawn to g3, which allowed me to capture one of the storming pawns and kick the black knight off of that square. Remember, this g-pawn is being protected by that knight. So next we exchanged minor pieces, trading off his knight for my bishop, but I didn't mind that, because his knight was rather strong and my bishop was quite inactive behind my pawn chain. Then black captured my knight with his bishop, but my other knight swooped in to replace it. Black plays queen to d7, and I play bishop to e3, connecting my rooks. Black played h4, I'm not entirely sure why, because I could simply capture it and undouble my pawns on the g-file. So finally the pawn storm was over, and now I just have to chain my kingside pawns together to make them stronger and perhaps even start moving them up towards promotion. Here black plays knight to h5, and then I play bishop to f2. And the reason I played that is because I want to overprotect the g3 square. The black knight was eyeing g3 to fork my queen and my king, and I needed to overprotect it. If, for example, I had played some other move, then the queen could capture my knight, which is the only defender of g3, and then after I capture back, the knight could jump to g3 and fork the king and the queen, and win back the queen. This combination would win a knight for black. So let's go back to where I moved my bishop to overprotect. Although the idea of overprotecting was the right idea, I actually did it with the wrong piece. Because look what black could do instead. He could capture my g-pawn, and then after my king captures back the rook, the knight can do the royal fork on f4. So really what I should have done is, instead of overprotecting with the bishop, I should have overprotected with the queen, because she would have been able to defend both g3 and g2. In any case, I defended it with the bishop, but again, fortunately for me, my opponent didn't see that combination. And so he played bishop to e7. So then I played g4. This gives my pawn more protection from that rook, and it helps to chain up my kingside pawns. Unfortunately, it also gives black a nice outpost for his knight on f4, which it immediately moves to. Again, the knight is attacking my queen, so I move her to safety onto the c-file. Finally, black castles, and I start a pawn storm of my own. Black moves his rook back to the corner, putting more pressure on the h-file, and I continue storming with a5. Black responds by pushing his b-pawn, which we then exchange. However, by capturing back with the queen, he leaves his bishop hanging, and this is where his position falls apart. I capture the bishop with check, and the king moves to b8. And then I move my knight to c6, forking the king and the rook. And at this point, black resigned. So needless to say, I was happy with how this game turned out. Some of the key maneuvers that I think were interesting were the kingside pawn storm and how my knights were able to deal with it, the creation of the knight outpost on f5, the maneuvering of my knights to get one at the f5 outpost and to get his replacement on e3, and the queenside pawn break that created weaknesses in black's camp, which allowed me to win material. As always, I hope you learned something from this episode, and thanks for watching.